Morning all. I thought it would be nice to revisit the Brilliancy by Mikhail game against Larsen, played in 1965. The circumstances around this game: it was a World Championship semi-finals candidates match. It was fiercely contested. Larsen was ahead after winning game 1, Tau won game 2, games 3 and 4 were drawn. Larsen won game 5, Tau came back to win game 6. So it was all neck and neck at this moment. These two players were about the same age. Mikhail, of course, been world champion back in 1960, and he'd been trying to get back to qualify again. This is not 5 years later. Larsen was approaching the peak of his powers. If you remember, he played in USSR versus Rest of the World match on board 1 above Fischer in 1970. So they're both at their peak strength, or near peak strength. So how did this game go? Mikhail played e4, and we saw Larsen playing the Sicilian defence. Knight f3, and now we see knight c6. The modern reason for knight c6 is usually the Sveshnikov variation of the Sicilian, but here what we see after d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4 is the move e6, and now after knight c3 we see d6. And this old Scheveningen structure was quite popular around this time without the move a6. a6 I've often referred to as a high-class waiting move. It does several things in the Sicilian Najdorf. It helps black play b5, bishop b7 later. It deprives white of the b5 square. Is that of crucial importance? Okay, white plays bishop e3, and this looks at this moment as though it's kind of an English attack system in modern terms, that white will continue with f3, queen d2, and maybe castle queenside. But no, at this time the idea of playing f4 here was very popular and very sharp. And now after bishop e7, instead of having a pawn on f3, the queen comes to f3. So what's the advantage of the queen being here rather than on d2? Well, there's no bishop fianchetto to take out with bishop a6. The queen on f3 means also that, say g4, g5, the queen can flip over easily to h3 later. Imagine a bishop was there. So this configuration is very aggressive. Black does dare castle on kingside, and Mikhail castles queenside. Note thou that a6 still hasn't been played, and curiously we get the move queen c7. And you might think, is attacking the queen really such a waste of time in this position? To say use that b5 square, which black hasn't covered up with the Najdorf type move a6. Is it really a waste of time? Well, in fact, Mikhail thought it wasn't. He plays knight db5, and he's of course eyeing d6. The queen can't come away from d6 here. This knight's protecting a2, so queen a5, I think we could just snap up d6. So if the queen wants to protect d6, its logical square is played to b8, and surely the knight will just be kicked, and black wants to play b5 anyway. Well, the thing is, has white actually gained time from this overall? It looks as though white's attack is already running here with great speed. And, maybe there wasn't even a necessity at the moment to have played knight db5. Maybe g4 was possible just then, but okay, so black's going to return a tempo gainer with a6. But for the moment, white's attack seems quite dangerous already with g4 now. Okay. Now e5 looks absolutely horrendous because of just f5, and this d5 square is terrible. g5 coming up, that looks like a total disaster. d5 seems totally ruled out, so black can't really react classically in the centre to this flank attack, it would seem, in this position. So it seemed logical for black to try for his own attack. And the queen actually placed on b8, you might think, offers a little bit of a perk that if there's a later a6, b5, maybe b4 is very useful, especially if white plays a3, and then you have pressure on b2 quite fast. All about speed of attacks here on both sides of the board. So black does play a6, and the knight just returns to the centre. And now, of course, b5 is not possible because of knight takes c6. So if black wants to play b5, he has to do something about this knight, or take on d4 first, or play maybe bishop d7 at some point. Okay, but actually he takes on d4, and this might be slightly improving the attacking force of white here, because after bishop takes d4, statistically, when Tau has bishops pointing at the opponent's king, that's usually a very, very bad sign that their king side is going to collapse later. So we do have a bishop pointing at the g7 square, potentially x-raying that g7 square. But black plays b5, and now here is where white can seemingly continue the attack quite logically with g5. Now after knight d7, one would perhaps expect white to be slightly concerned about b4, driving the knight back, and the attacking possibilities after that which are generated. Maybe bishop b7 puts more pressure on e4, for example, for knight c5. So driving away this knight is positional. It's weakening e4 control. So you might think a3 should be considered. Otherwise, black would seem to be putting potential pressure on the queen side and e4 as well soon. Mikhail plays for the moment bishop d3 though. He's not concerned about b4. And is it a big deal if the knight is driven back to, say, e2? I mean, you might think the knight can reroute, for example. Is that such a big deal? Well, I think these are things to check out now. b4 was played. I think we'll check out knight e2 in the second pass. But it may be that also black, once the knight is driven from d5, black might be able to afford e5 as well, challenging the central control, trying to liberate the pieces. And that might be quite promising if black plays e5. So what are the dynamic choices available to Mikhail? For those of you who have not seen this game before, you might, I hope, find this very, very interesting, this next move. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now, or you might want to pause the video. Okay, white plays the beautifully aesthetic knight d5. Now you often see knight d5 in gambits like the Smith-Morrow gambit. Knight d5 is often a move, but here it's these bishops. These bishops are just beautifully celebrated. Let's behold this position with these bishops after ed, ed, with a bishop on this one and this one. They're complementary, beautiful attacking bishops. Just aesthetically, it's a wonderful position. But you might think, what are the actual concrete threats as well? There are very serious concrete threats in this position as well, surely. Queen h5, g6, for example, trying to defend off h7. Queen h6, maybe, very dangerous. Because then you can imagine, if black ever touches the f-pawn, white could potentially just play the smashing bishop takes g6. So queen h5 would seem to be a majorly serious threat, and h7 also is an excuse for a double attack here as well, with queen e4. Okay, queen has got access to e4 as well, so that's also a major threat, queen e4. So that might help explain why this particular next move was played. But there might be alternatives here. Black actually played f5. Okay, that does cover up the e4 square, but there might be an alternative in g6 as well. That takes away the double attack, or queen h5 takes away both queen e4 and queen h5 to play g6 here. But it looks very, very risky. It looks if g6 is played in this position, surely white might try the peeling h4. Does black have the time to arrange a defence on g6 h4? It's very interesting to consider in the second pass. But black's move f5 now is the defensive try made. It slightly weakens control of e6. White doesn't have to necessarily take here, so he keeps control of f6 as well. The bishop has a nice clear sight of g7 here. Of course this bishop is blocked out of the picture, but this e-file, this loose bishop here, is an element of the position which Cao is using now to leverage a little bit of attacking initiative. This rook isn't doing much at the moment on d1. You might think, well, does it belong on the h-file? No, the centre is where the rook can celebrate itself. Rook de1. And all of a sudden, with these pawns here, this bishop's a little bit hemmed in. Does it want to go back to d8? Actually, when Larsen plays rook f7, I think he might want the bishop to be used for f8, then maybe g6 and bishop g7, for example. We see now h4. There's a slight liability of white's position that this d5 could be vulnerable, surely, to moves like bishop b7, and somehow putting more pressure on d5. Bishop b7 is played. Okay, but this does allow a tactical idea. This rook slightly overloaded, protecting f5 and e7. But you might think, hold on a sec, d5 is vulnerable as well. You don't want any other black pieces attacking d5 here. This diagonal is quite sensitive at the moment, surely. But nevertheless, it would be nice to get access to g7. So can you spot the tactic which Mikhail played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, he plays bishop takes f5. So this rook's overloaded. Rook takes f5, rook takes e7. Now g7's on the fire, so it doesn't matter for the moment about d5. But now it becomes crazily tactical. d7 is also loose. The tactics start. Black now plays knight e5, using that pin on the pawn, blocking g7 access, attacking the queen. Very sharp position here. Forcing move queen e4 is played, attacking the rook. And the knight's also attacked, so the rook can't just stumble back. But this next move would seem to tick all the boxes. Queen f8, protecting the rook, attacking this rook. And what if rook takes b7, though? That's something for the second pass, but it looks as though rook takes f4, and that starts to be a little bit dangerous for white, with f1 in sight. Mikhail in this position plays actually f takes e5. Okay, so if queen takes e7, queen takes f5 would seem to be good position. Black does use some forcing moves. Attacks the queen again. Queen now comes back to e2 where it can't be attacked. Bishop's on it. Okay. Now black does take on e7. So we see queen takes f3, d takes e5. So what has been achieved after that combinatory sequence? The opposite coloured bishops, you might think, gives black some chances here. White technically at the moment is a pawn up, but if d5 drops, surely black has some chances. But sometimes in attacking positions, the opposite coloured bishops favours the attacking player. It's like having an extra piece on that colour complex. Are the dark squares particularly vulnerable in black's camp here? Like these dark squares, f8, g7. Can this bishop be made use of. Rook e1, and we see rook d8. Rook takes e5. So for the moment, white is now 2 pawns up. Queen d6, and that d5 looks set to drop, but now queen f4, and white's keeping the 2 pawns up here after queen f4 because of a simple idea that bishop takes d5. We have rook e8 check, forcing move. So if takes, we have queen takes d6. So 2 pawns up here. Matt Larsen's in a difficult position. He plays rook f8, and now queen e4 just protects d5, 2 pawns up still, and now threatening also rook e7 potentially, or rook e8 is tempting. We see now b3 being tried. It looks as though this potentially is also still quite dangerous, this check here. A takes b3, 3 pawns up, but check, and now check, and it looks a little bit dangerous. c3. Okay, but black goes back to d6. He's concerned about f8 and these checks like rook e8. Mikhail in this position finds a nice little combination here. There are probably various ways to win. He has material up significantly. 3 pawns up. Can you guess the move he played here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, it's a lovely forcing move, bishop c5. So on queen takes c5, we have check, forcing rook f8. We have check again, and the final killer move. I wonder if you can spot it. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. It snuffs out, by the way, the checks on f2. That's a clue as well. So attacking and defending, really. Okay, can you spot it in this position? A lovely forcing move to finish off the game. Okay, the move queen f7. f8 is impossible to defend here with this light square bishop. It's on f8, a dark square disaster after all. On queen f2 check we can just take here, and the rook can't take, it's pinned. On queen d5 we just take here and then take on f8. A wonderful attacking game, and put Mikhail through in this semi-final to the next round. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Let's have a look in the second pass at the technical nitty-gritty. Here it is just plainly a disaster. So let's go back and see, did white always have a technical advantage from the opening? What about this knight d5 idea? Bishop e3. Okay, white has an attacking initiative. So f4 leaves the idea of queen f3. The bishop here is just being used to support d4 for the queen to venture off with queen f3. Castles. White enjoys a slight advantage from the opening. So this move queen c7 isn't actually questionable from an engine point of view to play queen c7. It looks as though there's no big deal about it to put the queen on b8, funny enough, because black's going to get the a6 move in at some point, or maybe even use the knight in some other way. So that, for the moment, doesn't seem such a big deal here to play queen c7. It's one of the respectable moves according to the engine here. So bishop d7. Okay, so we have this position with the queen on b8 and white playing g4. So the tempo returning a6. And now we have an interesting idea, technically springing up, of playing for e5 after knight takes d4. So knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. The queen can be used on b8 for the move e5 in this position. Was this really a missed opportunity? e5, b5 was played, but e5, okay. Why would this move be so strong? Well, it would liberate the bishop on taking here. I think this would be harmless for white, this kind of position. In fact, more than harmless, harmful. Bishop takes g4, whoops, liberating this bishop as well. And we're losing the exchange and obliteration, in fact. So e5 might be a very interesting move to consider, eyeing not just the bishop, but g4. So let's go with g5 here, bishop g4, queen g3, very sharp, ed, rook takes d4. Is white going to merge with an advantage here because of this g file? Very cold clinical play here, rook d2. So if the knight ever moves, there's queen takes g4. If the bishop moves, g takes f6. For example, I think this would be favourable for white, this g file. This looks like a good position. And if the knight moves, well, then just queen takes g4, and that's even bigger, that advantage. Look at the d5 control, look at knight d5. Black's pieces are shut in. This pawn is shutting in the queen and the bishop. It's not very nice. So this tense position might actually lead to an advantage for white in any case. Here, this rook d2 is a very interesting idea, just being casual about getting material back. So was e5 that powerful in any case? Black has resources, it seems. Knight takes e4. Queen c8 protecting g4. Maybe this is much better version than the game though. It could have been tried. So in the game we saw, instead of e5, the move b5. And white's attack proceeds with g5, knight d7. And now this big question about a3. Is it really necessary to play a3? The engine's mentioned it at depth 17. a3 or bishop d3? It's thinking bishop d3 is technically worse. But bishop d3 has a huge aesthetic value, if nothing else, of two bishops pointing at g7 and h7. And the engine's only considering knight a4, not what happened in the game. On bishop d3, b4, knight a4. Is this a bug in the engine's thinking, dynamic? So let's see, because that's why a3 is favoured. But if we played a3 here, black would surely get some counterplay with b4. The queen's logically placed on b8 here. Look at this, coordination on b2. Okay, white can play b3. And maybe white's still better. The attack seems promising still, if this is solidified a bit, but it's a better version than the game, surely. Black has piece play here, and the king doesn't seem in grave danger in this sort of position. These b-file prospects seem evident. Okay, so that doesn't seem so bad for black at all, this kind of position, if a3 was played. And that's the passive type of move which seems to be being prompted here. If you look at the flavour of this position, it's evident black's getting counterplay. This alternative idea to play bishop d3, it was not clear how black was getting out of the congestion charges of the position after bishop d3. Okay, we see the move b4, what else? So here, it's a mystery, this knight d5, to the engine anyway, that knight d5 looks like a mystery. Is it a case of a practical move which someone got away with, but technically there's a big flaw in it? This is a major point of investigation, it seems. Well, at a certain depth, knight d5, but aesthetically it has great beauty, something which computers do not appreciate great beauty just yet. These two bishops pointing at g7 and h7. Okay, so are they actually worth it for the knight sacrifice made. So critical, it would seem, here is not f5, which seems to be just equality, but g6. So we're going to get into the crux of the matter here with this game. If g6 handles the double attack threat, the major threat, let's do threat analysis. The major threat is actually queen e4. Forget queen h5. Queen e4 attacking e7, h7 is now the major threat. So there are two main ways at this point of the game to get two versions of the game going, to play either g6 or f5. So the engine likes g6. Okay, first of all, if black is slightly better, it's only slightly better, even at this point. So what can we do with the white position? I think we've got this h4 plan, which intuitively looks nice, and there seems to be some other ideas as well of just moving the rook away paradoxically from the h file, but that seems counterintuitive because you want to leverage g6 for an h file attack, surely. So I think we need to test h4. What would actually happen on h4? Let's go with knight c5. Is this really too slow, for example? Knight takes d3, bishop f5, and it becomes apparent now, hang on a sec, this bishop is quite a solid bishop for h7 here. And what about c2? And what about rook c8 coming in? So queen c7, hang on, this attack seems to have evaporated into nothing. h4 seems far too slow. It seems as though black has the attacking prospects here. Look at that c2. It's been heavily accentuated as a clear point of attack, and white's attack is nothing. Wow, so it seems g6 as a target for h4, h5 is out of the question here. It's too slow. Can white improve on that, you might think, after knight c5? Bishop c4, getting out of the way. Bishop f5 still, key move. And it seems again, hold on a sec, this is getting a bit dangerous. What about knight a4's coming up? What is black actually threatening? Knight e6 does attack the bishop and attacks both bishops simultaneously. Knight e6, tactical idea is being threatened here. If b3, again it looks as though black is having defensive resources. I think it's stemming really from this bishop on f5. It's defending and attacking. That's a beautiful bishop on f5, and that ruins white's conception of the h4. So we can be satisfied, at least in our initial investigation here, that on g6 h4 doesn't seem to do the trick. What about rook he1? Let's go with this. Bishop d8. What's the idea? Queen h3. Maybe f5, f6 for queen h6 is apparent. Is that the threat? f5. Queen h6 is the immediate threat. Much faster just to use g7 here. So let's go with knight e5. Queen h6. And at this point, by the way, I should mention someone on my chess club, Roy Royce, has talked about Tao games, the magician, and how people with computers find in certain variations of appendix 2.3.5 there might have been a chance for the opponent to have got an advantage, and it feels like this is an example of such a game. So in this position, is there a chance for black, if he played all these moves, to have a minuscule advantage after Tao's knight d5? And what is at stake here is quite a lot more than this game actually, if you think about it. The computer suggestion of a3 doesn't celebrate aesthetics, it doesn't celebrate attacking bishops. So we're trying to prove here if these attacking bishops on g7 and h7 were justified by that beautifully aesthetic knight sack. If nothing else, forget Tao for a moment, it's just beautiful aesthetics at stake. If the queen coming like this and the rook here is much faster for g7 attack, we need to investigate it. So in this position, is black in trouble? I think he'd crumble on knight takes d6 as an example. It's not mentioned. Knight takes d3 rather. Takes f6. This crumbles black. It's going to get mated surely. Rook e8 gets mated. So the knight cannot take the bishop. What is white actually threatening in this position? F takes e, clearly. So bishop b6, tactical defense from black, which no human would play at this point. This is just to see technically if we can refute the attack. Okay, so f5, bishop takes f5, bishop takes, and we need obviously more computing power, more time, so it's just getting a little idea of the possibilities only. Rook takes e5, bishop h3, and we still have a position which isn't that clear. It's opposite coloured bishops, and white's got this big d pawn potentially. Is this so bad? The queen's going to come out to h4. There's still some chances. It's not necessarily completely lost for white. So all we've really proved is that g6 might have been a better defensive try. That's, I believe, all we've proved. So after knight d5, beautifully aesthetic move in a very, very important match. And I think Mikhail had said something like about the way of losing. It's important to show courage. If you're going to lose, at least show courage in losing. Knight d5 shows courage. It shows the dynamic opportunities. And so white's concept was helped, it seems technically, by the move f5. But exactly why? Exactly why? We go on to the next dynamic and aesthetic point of the game, that actually g takes f6 is not played in this position, which seems entirely logical. You might think Tau as the attacker would be opening up lines like the g file here, because we're just leaving a pawn on g5. But he's thinking about the practicalities of overloaded pieces in playing a rook to the centre, away to the centre here. On g takes f6, let's see, bishop takes or knight takes. On bishop takes, queen h5, this looks very, very dangerous for black as well. But is it enough? Very brief analysis here. It seems exceptionally dangerous. At least white has a draw, but he wants to win from this game. Okay, it seems that black might have some defensive resources coming up. Black's holding the g1 square as well with this bishop here. So maybe it's not so clear taking with the g pawn here on f6. Okay. So what was actually played was rook to the centre with the d rook, not even the h rook here. And the engine really likes, technically, as though white has blood on the hill, because of bishop d8 maybe a much better try than rook f7 that we saw later. Bishop d8, or is it? Is it? What is actually going on here? Queen h5? What's the threat? I believe the threat might be g6, or is it something else? Bishop takes g7 is a threat. Also rook e8 is a threat in this position. So let's give that a go. Knight c5, bishop takes g7, knight takes. This is extraordinarily complex now. If cd, then I think there's queen c7 check is very useful. Queen takes g7, so ignore that. King b1. And what's white actually threatening in this position? g6 now. There's no defense around the black king here, so g6 is the major threat in this position. So let's take that. Check. Wow. And now a real powerful interference tactic, threatening mate and blocking black's defensive resources along the second rank. If rook f7, there's rook e8 here, so bishop e7, forced mate, g6. Wow, we've just queen and rook left in this position. It seems black is helpless. Now the threat is taking a rook g8. Is white really crashing through with limited resources here? Yes, all the checks have run out. Touchdown, queen h8 is now threatened. Wow, let's go back. What is going on here? Behind the scenes of this game, that bishop d8, is it really answered by queen h5 with the threat of bishop takes g7? What about g6, you might ask? Hold on a sec. Queen h6? How would you defend? g7 again. This can just be simply taken here. Attacking the queen and g7, trying to defend g7. In this position, white's got a major attack, h4. This bishop's not going anywhere now. So h5, maybe, is crushing as well as bishop c4. Wow. So these defensive opportunities seem a bit limited after rook d e1. Initially, the engine didn't like this position at all because of bishop d8. But now it seems, hold on a sec, the threat now is queen h5 and bishop takes g7. So Larsen played rook f7, and now white can use the h pawn, which in a lot of positions would have been slow. It seems white takes time now to use the h pawn. What is black's threat? Is black actually threatening something? Knight c5 to take away one of these important bishops. So h4. How is knight c5 ruled out, for example, here? h5. Let's take queen b5. Just g6. So the h file is important in this variation. Queen's off. Well, we just take take the rook. No. White's going to be better there. So it seems in this position. Okay, so we see rook f7, h4, and the engine really likes Tal's move h4 now. Knight c5 is interesting, but bishop b7 was played, and the h pawn potentially carries on with h5, but it wasn't played. Instead, we see bishop takes f5, another very good move as well, another very dangerous move. h5 might clinically, it seems at this depth at least, it seems as though h5 might clinically have been a better move. Let's have a look. Queen f8, g6 for example, g takes. Now here h6, and what's the point? Is the point undermining this diagonal? It looks as though this diagonal is collapsing with rook g6 as a threat. So what's happening here? Bishop takes f5. It looks as though this attack's crashing through in any case. The pawns are not really blocking out the attack. That pawn on h6 is a really dangerous lever, it seems, for rook g7. Okay, so this looks dangerous as well in this position, just to play h5, but Tal's choice, bishop takes f5, was played instead. Black's pieces are overloaded, so white's really getting a dangerous attack now on g7. It has to be blotted out. Protected again, protecting g7, attacking the rook. F takes, and we're fizzling out into what seems just a material advantage position with the opposite colour bishops. Did black have bishop takes d5 here? On bishop d5 it does attack the rook. Surely e takes d6, and we're attacking g7 again. That's no good to take here. Rook g7 apparently is much better. Rook takes d4, taking here. This is interesting. Is rook d4 among black's best moves here? b3, so the king can go to b2. It's an unpleasant position, but it seems better version of the game. So let's go back. So in this position, queen e3. Did black really have bishop takes d5, or is this just a mirage? anything else, say rook d1, and now rook f3 is painful. And now just taking here. So the bishop is functionally supporting rook f3 as well as attacking the rook. It seems this might be a key improvement for black. Bishop takes d5, but still better for white. Even though with that rook on the 7th, black's in a terrible state still. But okay, so bishop d5 was the last opportunity to try for something. If we take this a little bit further, this pawn dropping as well. So we've got quite a few pawns for the bishop. 6 pawns versus 3, with a lovely central queen here. Rook on the 7th. Is black's position going to get worse? I'm not sure it's improving at all. It's very difficult for black to extricate himself without counterplay. This is a situation of no counterplay, I think. Rook a7, c4. Let's go with this. So the queen can't ever take as a queen f7. The rook can't take, so rook takes f7. So black's just sitting for a moment, seeing what white will do. White's got all the play basically. A very dominating position. And here it seems maybe even can afford to take off the rooks. It's a better version of the game though. It looks as though this is the way for black to have played. So anyway, so it seems okay. In the game we saw rook f3, and black's now missed the opportunity, it seems, for bishop d5 now. I don't think bishop d5 now works at all, because actually if you think about it, the rook has just blocked the attack on h1. So e takes d6 here is a much greater improvement earlier than the earlier version, and it's not even attacking d4 here. So this position seems pretty dire actually for black. Queen d2 can even be played, and white's just material up here. Any check here attacking the rook doesn't matter in fact because of g7. No, because the rook is attacked. So that's just material up for white. So in the game we see, in this position it seems white is now in charge here. Queen takes e7 simplifies now to what looks to be just a position 2 pawns up. It seems 2 pawns up. This doesn't help queen d6. Queen f7 was a better try. So this is now much easier now. Queen f4, one of the strongest moves, defending indirectly for rook e8 check here. That'll be just winning the queen. There's no problem there. And queen e4, the actual threat I think is rook e7 or b3, even just maintaining the threat of rook e7. So black plays b3, at least he's trying to open up some lines, generate something. It's just taken with the a pawn. If he took with the c pawn, it's still okay. There's no major trap there. Check. Check. The queen can't venture, surely. Queen takes b3 would be mated, surely. It's mate in 3, check. And a check here, mating in 3, taking on f8 there. So the queen, it's pretty hopeless now. But this move is very incisive. Bishop c5, this final little combination, 2 pawns up here. Bishop c5. So this is absolutely 100%, it seems, solid combination for queen f7 here. Okay, there's a lot of behind the scenes things which you might not have seen before in this game. There's a very, very large question about the aesthetics of a position. Is it really deserving of investigation? And it seems to be the answer is yes, especially when we have at stake either a passive move a3 or a really aggressive, beautiful move to really make the beauty work in chess. I think is another aspect of chess. If we can get these beautiful games that actually prove to a large extent their soundness, and that was one of the goals of this morning. That's pretty interesting stuff. That even with absolute best defences, white would only be like, at worst it seems, half a point worse if black was playing like a supercomputer in this game. So a brilliancy from Mikhail in a very critical match, and shows great courage, which was one of his goals, I think. If he's going to lose, to at least lose courageously. And he didn't lose, he played courageously and got the result. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.